Hello, I'm John David Bruja on location in front of Cape George Lighthouse in Nova Scotia. And welcome to a special edition of John's Traveling Movie Corner, United States Lighthouse Society, Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island Tour. Well, it's another new day and we're in Baddock, Nova Scotia on Cape Breton Island. And we already have a lighthouse in the distance and we haven't even boarded the boat yet. Well, I boarded the Windstar cruise and we're ready for our 1 hour tour to see 2 lighthouses. And guess what? There's one lighthouse right there already. East End Lighthouse. First one in 1875, the next one in 1911. At a height of 47 feet, what's unique about this light is it's got a green light flashing, and it was automated in 1960. And as we approached our next lighthouse, we caught a glimpse of a bald eagle as it soared overhead. We are now approaching our next lighthouse, Kidston Island West End Lighthouse, which first arrived in 1976 at a height of 35 feet. And was built on the northeast end of the island. It marks the southwest approach to Baddock Harbor. The white fiberglass tower is marked with 2 red bands displaying a red light. And in the distance is Alexander Graham Bell's summer home. Well, this lovely trip that we took on the Windstar cruise, we got to see 2 lighthouses and Alexander Graham Bell's summer home on his island where he owned over 600 acres. Next up, an added attraction. Mabel Bell and Alexander Graham Bell's statues sitting at a park bench overlooking Baddock Bay on Cape Breton Island. Sculptor Peter Buston created the statues, which arrived in Baddock, Nova Scotia, July 2008. Well, after we finished the tour on the Windstar cruise, we decided to take a trip up to Alexander Graham Bell's National Historic Site to learn more about the man, the inventor, and all the other discoveries that he made here. Step inside to the museum to check out full-scale replicas, exhibits, workshops, multimedia displays, and of course the invention of the telephone, and thousands of other artifacts donated by their children. The Alexander Graham Bell National Historic Site opened in August of 1956. Then, on our way to the next lighthouse, we pulled over and checked out the Seal Island Bridge. Opened in 1961, it is the province's 3rd longest bridge. You can see the McNeil Beach Lighthouse in the distance, but we'll get a better view as we cross the Seal Island Bridge. First lit in 1884, the McNeil Beach Lighthouse stands at 33 feet in height. It was automated in 1962 and abandoned in 1990, but still stands today. Well, we arrived to our next lighthouse, and unfortunately, it's the last lighthouse of the day. Black Rock Point Lighthouse. This one had 3 lights that stood here over the years. A square 2-story lighthouse was built here in 1937, replacing the earlier one from 1868. In 1977, a rectangular building was constructed east of the lighthouse. In 1979, the lighthouse was purchased, moved several hundred meters east, and became a private residence. An octagonal lantern room was installed atop the tower in 1987, and it's as you see it now. Well, I guess we are not done for the day. We found 2 more lighthouses, the Great Broadier front and rear range lighthouses, and you could still see Black Rock Point Lighthouse in the distance. The rear range lighthouse was first lit in 1903 at a height of 46 feet. That makes it the tallest square wooden lighthouse in Nova Scotia. It was electrified in 1956, automated in 1993, and vertical red stripes was added in 1984. Well, we had time for one more lighthouse. The Sydney Range Front Lighthouse, first lit in 1905 at a height of 58 feet. And then we ended the day in Sydney, Nova Scotia, checked into our hotel, and decided to check out the sights in the surrounding area, and returned to the hotel just in time for a beautiful sunset. Well, it looks like morning, feels like morning, so that means it must be a new day to another new lighthouse. But unfortunately, we finally reached a low point on this trip. The Low Point Lighthouse behind me, aka also known as Flat Point. First one was established in 1832, and the current one in 1938 at a height of 72 feet. Low Point Lighthouse is marking the eastern entrance into Sydney Harbor. It was the 9th lighthouse to be built in Nova Scotia. The two-story dwelling was removed in 1987, and Low Point Lighthouse was automated in 1988. We passed it by on our way to Low Point Lighthouse, but on the way back to our next light, the bus driver pulled over and we checked out a homemade lighthouse built by the owner, and he graciously allowed us to take pictures and go inside. Then it was on to a photo op at Whitney Pier Melting Pot Monument. Well, we now made it to our next lighthouse, the Louisburg Lighthouse. First built in 1734, the current one in 1924 at a height of 54 feet. It is one of 4 lighthouses that was built in this location. Louisburg was one of the first lighthouses to be built in Canada and the second one in North America. It received range lights in 1897, but unfortunately the lighthouse burned to the ground in 1923, while the fog alarm building survived. It was automated in 1990, and all that remains now is the modern foghorns, equipment shed, and the 55-foot octagonal white tower standing behind me right alongside the remnants of the first lighthouse. And yes, that's the fort, our next destination that you can see from the Louisburg Lighthouse. Well, now we take a step back in time as we visit the Louisburg Fortress National Historic Site. It is surrounded by the rocky shoreline from Cape Breton Island and is 35 miles from Sydney. It was built between 1713 and 1745, but the reconstruction of the town and fortress, including almost all of the buildings, started in 1961 and continued through the early 1980s. It is the largest reconstruction facility in North America. Well, it's the end of the day. That can only mean one thing. We are at our last lighthouse of the day, Debrius Lighthouse, established in 1891 at a height of 31 feet. And yes, it is the only remaining wooden tower lighthouse in Nova Scotia. The 6-sided white wooden tower with a red iron lantern was moved back from eroding cliff in 2015, and it was automated in 1988. Can you believe we've been doing this for 14 days and we still got lighthouses to see? That means it's another day and another lighthouse. This one is Jerome Point Lighthouse, first established in 1883, and the current one behind me in 1956 at a height of 35 feet. Jerome Point Lighthouse marks the entrance to the canal from St. Peter's Bay, hence the original name of the first lighthouse, St. Peter's Bay Lighthouse. The current wooden square pyramidal tower came with a detached keeper's dwelling. In 1963, both the dwelling and the lighthouse property was deeded to the Canal Authority. We then took a slight detour and visited the St. Peter's Canal National Historic Site located on the southeastern shore of Cape Breton Island, Nova Scotia. Well, unfortunately, we are leaving Cape Breton, but before we do, we have one more lighthouse in the distance that we'll be going to. We are at Balashay Point Rear Range Lighthouse. And was built in 1963, and as you can see with the fence going all the way around it, access to it is limited. At 20 feet in height, it's located next to Canso Canal and is a salt shaker style lighthouse. It is the second light built at this site. Balashay Point Rear Range Lighthouse is on a grassy knoll, which is home to a cemetery with 6 headstones next to it. We are now crossing the Canso Bridge for a second time, bidding farewell to Balashay Lighthouse and Cape Breton Island. A bonus light. Queensport Lighthouse, also known as Crow Harbor, also known as Rock Island. It's halfway between Canso and Guysborough, on the southern shore of Chedabucto Bay. The current Queensport Lighthouse behind me was built in 1936. Well, it took us a while, several winding roads and an unexpected ferry ride, but we made it to our last lighthouse, actually lighthouses. It's 2 of them, the Old Port Bickerton and Port Bickerton Lighthouse. And the Old Port Bickerton Lighthouse that you see in the distance is now the Nova Scotia Interpretive Center, which started in 1997 with info about Port Bickerton lighthouses and other lighthouses in Nova Scotia. The first light was destroyed by fire in the late 20s. The second light was built in 1930, which is now the Nova Scotia Interpretive Center. The second lighthouse was almost engulfed by another fire in 1947, but got away with only minor roof damage. The most recent lighthouse was built in 1960, the third in the series, and it was automated in 1988. The first keeper's dwelling arrived in 1903. In 2014, a new renovated lightkeeper's dwelling is a weekly vacation rental cottage and an artist's retreat. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the show. I'm John David Bruja, on location at Halifax Harbor in Nova Scotia, standing across from George's Island. This has been a special edition of John's Traveling Movie Corner, United States Lighthouse Society, Nova Scotia, and Prince Edward Island Tour. I hope you enjoyed the ride.